The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty mercantile, and Clara Patterson pressed her trembling hand against the worn leather seat, wondering if she had made the most foolish decision of her entire 22 years of life. The journey from Boston to Terlingua, Texas, had taken 3 grueling weeks, each mile carrying her further from everything familiar and closer to a man she had never met. Through the smudged window, she could see the harsh landscape of West Texas stretching endlessly under the unforgiving July sun of 1882. The town itself was barely more than a collection of weathered buildings clustered together, as if seeking protection from the vast emptiness surrounding them. Clara's fingers went to the small leather journal tucked inside her carpetbag, the one containing all 7 letters from Franklin Young. She had read them so many times the paper had grown soft at the creases. His words had been kind, honest, and practical. He needed a wife. She needed a home. It seemed like a straightforward arrangement when she had been sitting in her cramped room at her aunt's boarding house, watching Boston's gray winter through a frosted window pane. Now, stepping down from the stagecoach onto the sun-baked earth of Texas, the reality of what she had done settled over her like a heavy blanket. The driver handed down her trunk and carpetbag with a grunt. Clara stood there, dust settling on her dark green traveling dress, and looked around. Franklin had written that he would meet her at the stage, but the small crowd gathered seemed to consist only of curious onlookers eager for any break in the monotony of their desert town. "Miss Patterson," the voice came from behind her, deep and uncertain. Clara turned and found herself looking up at a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and light brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. He held his hat in his hands, worrying the brim with long fingers. His eyes were a startling blue-green, the color of shallow ocean water, and they looked at her with an expression she could not quite name. Hope, perhaps, or fear. "Mr. Young." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Yes, madam, Franklin Young. I'm pleased you made it safely." He seemed rooted to the spot, just staring at her. Then, as if remembering himself, he quickly moved to pick up her trunk. "I've got a wagon just here. The ranch is about 8 miles out." Clara followed him to a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 patient horses. Franklin loaded her belongings with ease, his movements economical and practiced. She noticed how his shirt stretched across his shoulders, how his hands were rough and scarred from work. Everything about him spoke of a life lived outdoors, of hard labor and harsh conditions. He was nothing like the soft-handed clerks and merchants she had known in Boston. He helped her onto the wagon seat, his touch gentle despite the calluses. When he climbed up beside her and took the reins, she caught the scent of leather and sage and honest sweat. It was not unpleasant, just different. Everything here was different. They rode in silence for the first mile. The landscape rolled past in shades of brown and gold, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional twisted mesquite tree. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and hazy with heat. The sun beat down relentlessly, and Clara was grateful for the bonnet that shaded her face. "I hope the journey was not too difficult," Franklin finally said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "It was long," Clara admitted, "but I am here now." "Yes." He cleared his throat. "I want you to know, Miss Patterson, that I meant everything I wrote in my letters. I'll be a good husband to you. You'll want for nothing that's in my power to provide." The earnestness in his voice made Clara's chest tighten. She had spent so much time worrying about whether he would find her lacking that she had not considered he might have his own fears. "I'll try to be a good wife to you, Mr. Young." "Franklin, please, just Franklin. Then you should call me Clara." He glanced at her then, and a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Clara, that's a pretty name." The compliment, simple as it was, sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. They fell into silence again, but it felt less awkward now, more companionable. As they traveled, Franklin pointed out landmarks. The creek bed that ran full during the rare rains. The distinctive shape of a rock formation that helped with navigation. The turnoff that led to his nearest neighbor's property, the Hendersons, who lived 5 miles south. Clara listened and tried to memorize everything, but her mind kept circling back to the same worry that had plagued her since she first answered his advertisement. She was not beautiful. Her hair was plain brown, her figure too thin, her hands already showing the wear of the hard work she had done at her aunt's house. She had no accomplishments to speak of, no musical talent or artistic skill. She could read and write and do basic arithmetic. She could cook simple meals and mend clothes and keep a house clean. But was that enough? Would Franklin look at her day after day and regret his decision? Would he wish he had waited for someone prettier, more accomplished, more worthy of the life he was offering? The ranch, when they finally reached it, was more substantial than Clara had expected. A low adobe house with a covered porch stood at the center, surrounded by several outbuildings. A barn, a stable, corrals made of rough-hewn timber. She could see cattle in the distance, moving slowly across the sparse grassland. Everything was orderly and well-maintained, speaking of a man who took pride in his property. Franklin brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house and set the brake. He jumped down and came around to help Clara, his hands spanning her waist as he lifted her down. For a moment they stood close, his hands still on her waist, and Clara looked up into his face. He was handsome, she realized. Not in a refined way, but in the way of a man shaped by sun and wind and honest work. There was a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, and his nose had been broken at some point and healed slightly crooked. These imperfections only made him more real, more solid. "Welcome home," he said quietly. Home. The word felt foreign and wonderful all at once. The inside of the house was simple but clean. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace against one wall and a sturdy table with 4 chairs in the center. 2 doors led off to what Clara assumed were bedrooms. The floor was packed earth covered with woven rugs. The furniture was rough but serviceable. Everything was neat, as if Franklin had spent considerable time preparing for her arrival. "I thought," Franklin began, setting her trunk down by one of the bedroom doors, "that you might want your own room. For now, until you're comfortable, I know this is all strange for you." Relief and something else, something she could not quite identify, flooded through Clara. "That's very considerate. There's a woman in town, Mrs. Garrett, who'll stand as witness tomorrow when we go to get married, if that's still what you want." He said this last part quickly, as if afraid of her answer. "Of course," Clara said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "That's what we agreed," Franklin nodded, relief visible on his face. "I'll let you rest. I imagine you're tired from the journey. I've got evening chores to see to, but I'll be back to fix supper." "I can make supper," Clara said quickly. "That's my job now, is it not? You just got here." "It is fine if you want to rest. I would rather be useful." The truth was, Clara did not want to be alone with her thoughts in this strange place. She wanted to do something, anything, to prove her worth. Franklin studied her for a moment, then nodded. "There is meat and vegetables. I'll show you where everything is." He walked her through the kitchen area, showing her the root cellar dug into the ground behind the house, the pump for water just outside the back door, the cast iron stove that dominated one corner. His pantry was better stocked than she had expected, with sacks of flour and cornmeal, jars of preserved vegetables, dried beans and rice. He must have been preparing for her arrival for some time. "I'll leave you to it then," Franklin said, settling his hat back on his head. "I should not be more than an hour." Clara watched him go, then stood alone in the kitchen of her new home. The silence pressed in around her, broken only by the ticking of a clock on the mantel and the distant lowing of cattle. She took a deep breath, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. By the time Franklin returned, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Clara had managed to prepare a simple meal of fried salt pork, beans, and cornbread. It was nothing fancy, but it was hot and filling. She had also found a cloth and wiped down the already clean table, needing something to do with her nervous energy. Franklin stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. Something shifted in his expression, softening the hard lines around his eyes. "Smells good." They sat across from each other at the table, the food between them. Clara watched anxiously as Franklin took his first bite, trying to gauge his reaction. He chewed slowly, swallowed, then met her eyes. "This is real good, Clara, thank you." The knot of tension in her chest loosened slightly. They ate in relative silence, both seeming unsure of what to say. Clara's eyes wandered around the room, taking in the details she had missed earlier. A rifle mounted above the fireplace. A photograph in a simple frame on a shelf, showing a stern-faced couple. A pair of worn work gloves draped over the back of a chair. "Those are my parents," Franklin said, noticing her gaze on the photograph. "They built this place, started the ranch. They passed 5 years back within 6 months of each other." "I am sorry," Clara said softly. "It was their time." They had a good life together, worked hard, built something that lasted. He paused, pushing beans around his plate. "That is what I want, to build something that lasts. A family, a legacy." The weight of expectation settled over Clara again. A family meant children. Children meant she would need to be a mother, to be enough not just for Franklin but for the lives they would create together. What if she failed? What if she could not give him children, or could not raise them properly? What if she disappointed him in 1,000 different ways? "You look troubled," Franklin observed. "Are you having second thoughts?" Clara forced herself to meet his eyes. Honesty, she decided, was better than pretense. "I am afraid I will not be what you expected, what you need." Franklin set down his fork and leaned back in his chair, studying her. "What makes you think that? I am not accomplished. I have no special skills or talents. I am just ordinary." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "What if I am not enough?" Something fierce flickered in Franklin's eyes. He leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table. "Clara, I did not ask for someone accomplished. I did not ask for talents or skills. I asked for a partner. Someone willing to build a life with me in this hard place. Someone honest and hardworking. Your letters showed me you're those things. But you do not really know me." "No," he agreed. "And you do not really know me. But we'll learn. That is what marriage is it not? Learning each other, growing together." He reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand, giving her the choice. "I'm not expecting perfection, Clara. I'm just hoping for a real partnership." Clara looked at his outstretched hand, rough and scarred and steady. She thought about the life that had led her here, the years of living on charity in her aunt's house after her parents died, always feeling like a burden, never quite enough. She thought about Franklin's words, simple and honest. Then she reached out and placed her hand in his. His fingers closed gently around hers, warm and solid. "We will figure this out together," he said. That night, Clara lay in the small bedroom Franklin had given her, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert. The wind whistling through gaps in the adobe, the distant cry of some night bird, the creak of the house settling. In the other room she could hear Franklin moving about quietly, preparing for bed. It was strange to think that tomorrow they would be married, bound together by law and church for the rest of their lives. Sleep came eventually, fitful and full of strange dreams. Morning arrived bright and early, sunlight streaming through the single window. Clara rose and dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple gray cotton that was respectable if not beautiful. She braided her hair and pinned it up, studying her reflection in the small mirror Franklin had provided. The face looking back at her was pale from the journey, with shadows under brown eyes that seemed too large. Not a beautiful bride by any measure. Franklin was already up, dressed in clean trousers and a white shirt that looked freshly pressed. He had shaved and combed his hair back from his face. When Clara emerged from her room, he turned and simply stared for a moment. "You look nice," he said, and there was something genuine in his voice that made Clara believe he meant it. "Thank you. So do you." They took the wagon back into Terlingua, the early morning air still relatively cool. Franklin handled the reins with easy competence, and Clara found herself watching his hands, his profile, trying to learn this man who would be her husband. He caught her looking once and smiled, a small, shy expression that transformed his face. The wedding was brief and practical, performed by a circuit judge in the front room of Mrs. Garrett's boarding house. Mrs. Garrett and her husband stood as witnesses, both of them beaming as if they had arranged the whole thing themselves. The judge recited the words, Franklin and Clara repeated their vows, and just like that, Clara Patterson became Clara Young. Franklin had a ring, a simple gold band that he slipped onto her finger with gentle care. Clara had not expected that, and the gesture touched her more than she could say. When the judge pronounced them man and wife, Franklin leaned down and kissed her cheek, chaste and sweet. His lips were warm, and Clara felt her face flush. Mrs. Garrett insisted they stay for coffee and cake, fussing over them like a mother hen. She was a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a tendency to chatter, filling any silence with observations about the town, the weather, and anything else that crossed her mind. Clara learned that Franklin was well respected in Terlingua, known for his fair dealing and hard work. That he had been alone on his ranch for too long, and everyone was glad to see him finally taking a wife. "You'll do well together," Mrs. Garrett said, patting Clara's hand. "I can see it. Franklin is a good man, and you have a steady look about you. That is what matters out here, steadiness." On the ride back to the ranch, Clara turned the ring on her finger, feeling its unfamiliar weight. "Thank you for the ring. You did not have to do that. I wanted you to have it. It was my grandmother's. She gave it to my mother, and my mother gave it to me before she passed, said I should give it to my wife someday." Franklin glanced at her. "It fits you well." Clara looked at the simple band with new eyes. This was not just any ring, but a family heirloom, something precious. That Franklin had given it to her, a stranger really, meant something. "I will treasure it." The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Clara rose early and prepared breakfast while Franklin saw to the animals. They ate together. Then Franklin would head out to work the ranch while Clara tackled the household tasks. There was always something to do: laundry, mending, cooking, cleaning, tending the small vegetable garden behind the house that Franklin had started but not maintained well. The work was hard but satisfying in a way Clara had not expected. This was her home, her responsibility. Everything she did mattered. Franklin proved to be a man of his word. He was patient and kind, never demanding, always considerate. He continued to give Clara her own room, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch as the sun set, and Franklin would tell her about his day. The calf that was born, the fence that needed mending, the spring that was running lower than he liked. In turn, Clara shared small things about her own day, and slowly, carefully, they began to share pieces of their pasts. Clara learned that Franklin's father had been a hard man, stern and unbending, while his mother had been the soft place the family could turn to. That Franklin had one sister who had married and moved to California, and they exchanged letters a few times a year. That he loved this land with a fierce devotion, despite its harshness. Franklin learned that Clara's parents had died of fever when she was 16, leaving her with nothing. That her aunt had taken her in, but made sure Clara knew she was a burden, working her hard and reminding her constantly that she should be grateful. That Clara loved to read, and books had been her escape during those hard years. 3 weeks into their marriage, a dust storm blew in from the west. Franklin saw it coming and rushed to get the animals secured and shutters closed. The storm hit with furious intensity, the wind howling around the adobe house, dust seeping in through every crack and crevice despite their efforts. The world outside disappeared in a brown haze. Franklin and Clara huddled inside, cloths tied over their faces to filter the dust-laden air. The storm raged for hours, and somewhere in the midst of it, Clara started to cry. It was too much, too overwhelming. The isolation, the harsh land, the constant fear that she was not enough, not strong enough, not capable enough for this life. Franklin heard her over the wind and moved closer. "Clara, are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak around the tears. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close against his side. "It is all right. The house is solid. We're safe." "It is not that," Clara managed. "I just feel so small, so useless. This land is so big and hard, and I do not know if I am strong enough for it." Franklin was quiet for a moment, his arm tightening around her. "You want to know what I see when I look at you, Clara? I see a woman who traveled halfway across the country to marry a stranger. I see someone who works from sunup to sundown without complaint, who took an empty house and made it a home. I see strength and courage, even if you do not see it yourself. I just worry that one day you will wake up and regret choosing me." Franklin turned her gently to face him, his hands on her shoulders. Even through the cloth covering half his face, she could see the intensity in his eyes. "I have never regretted it, not for one single moment. Every day, Clara, you prove that you're more than I even dreamed of when I placed that advertisement. You're not less than enough. You're everything." The words broke something open inside Clara, and she leaned into him, letting herself take comfort in his solid presence. Franklin held her, one hand stroking her back, murmuring quiet reassurances until the tears passed and the storm began to lessen. When the dust finally settled and they emerged to survey the damage, Clara felt something had shifted between them. A wall had come down. That night when Franklin started to head to his own room, Clara stopped him with a hand on his arm. "You do not have to sleep in there anymore if you do not want to." Franklin searched her face. "Are you sure?" Clara nodded. She was not entirely sure, but she was sure enough. This man had shown her nothing but kindness and patience. He had seen her at her lowest and had not turned away. It was time to truly be his wife. That night they lay together in the darkness of Clara's room, which became their room. Franklin held her gently, as if she might break, and they talked in whispers until sleep claimed them both. There was a sweetness to it that Clara had not expected, a tenderness that made her throat tight with emotion. In the morning, when Clara woke to find Franklin's arm draped over her waist and his breath warm on her neck, she felt something new. Not quite love, not yet, but the beginning of it. The seed of something that could grow into love, given time and care. As summer deepened into its hottest months, Clara found her rhythm in this new life. She learned to bake bread in the temperamental oven, to preserve vegetables against the long winter ahead, to mend not just clothes but also leather tack and torn feed sacks. Her hands grew calloused and strong. The sun darkened her skin despite her bonnet. She was becoming a ranch wife, shaped by the work and the land. Franklin taught her to ride, patiently walking beside her as she learned to handle a gentle mare named Rosie. At first, Clara was terrified of the height and the animal's power, but Franklin's steady encouragement helped her overcome her fear. Soon, she was riding out with him to check on the cattle or fix fences, happy to be his partner in the work rather than waiting at home. One August morning, Franklin announced they needed to make a trip to the Hendersons' place. John Henderson got thrown by a horse last week, broke his leg. His wife Sarah is managing alone with their boy, but it is a lot. I thought we could bring them some supplies, see if they need help with anything. Clara immediately set to packing food and other items that might be useful. When they arrived at the Henderson ranch, Clara was struck by how similar it was to their own place. Another adobe house, another collection of outbuildings, the same harsh landscape stretching in all directions. Sarah Henderson was a weathered woman in her 30s with tired eyes and a firm mouth. Her son Timothy was about 12, thin and serious-faced. John Henderson sat on the porch with his legs splinted and propped up, clearly frustrated by his forced inactivity. The men talked about ranch business while Clara followed Sarah into the house. It was less tidy than Franklin's place, with the clutter of a family dealing with unexpected hardship. Sarah looked at Clara with an assessing gaze. "So you are Franklin's mail order bride. We heard he had sent for someone." "Yes, Clara Young." She held up the basket of food. "I brought some things. We thought you might need help." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "That is kind. Truth is, I could use another pair of hands. Been trying to do everything myself while John heals, but there are only so many hours in a day." "Put me to work," Clara said simply. She spent the next several hours helping Sarah catch up on tasks that had fallen behind. They washed clothes, tended the vegetable garden, prepared and canned tomatoes from the small greenhouse Sarah maintained. As they worked, Sarah's reserve thawed, and she began to share stories of her own early days in Texas. She had come from Missouri with her parents as a child, married John when she was 19, and had been ranching ever since. "It is not an easy life," Sarah said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "But it is honest work, and there is satisfaction in that. You build something real out here. You matter." She gave Clara a sidelong glance. "How are you settling in? Franklin treating you well?" "He has been nothing but kind," Clara said honestly. "He is a good man. Lost too much too young, I think. His parents' deaths hit him hard. He buried himself in work after that, shut himself off from people. We were glad when we heard he was finally looking for a wife." Sarah paused in her work. "You are good for him, I think. He had a different look about him when he arrived today. Lighter, somehow." The comment stayed with Clara as they finished their work and prepared to leave. Could it be true? Was she actually good for Franklin, rather than just a burden he had taken on the ride home? Franklin was quiet, his eyes on the horizon. Clara studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands held the reins with easy competence. "Sarah said something today," Clara ventured. "She said I was good for you." Franklin glanced at her, surprised. "She did," she said. "You seemed lighter, happier." A slow smile spread across Franklin's face. "Well, I am happier. I have been happier every day since you arrived, Clara. Surely you know that." "I was not certain. I thought maybe you were just being kind." Franklin pulled the wagon to a stop, right there in the middle of the rutted track that served as a road. He turned to face her fully. "Clara, I need you to understand something. You are not a duty or an obligation to me. You are the best thing that has happened to me in longer than I can say." Coming home to you, seeing you at the table, hearing your voice, sleeping beside you at night, it has all been more than I hoped for. You make this house a home. You make me want to be better, work harder, build something worthy of you. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I am just me. I am not special. You are special to me. That is what matters. Franklin reached out and cupped her cheek with his rough hand. I know you have doubts. I can see them in your eyes sometimes. But I am going to spend every day proving to you that you are more than enough, that you are everything. This time, when Franklin kissed her, it was not a chaste peck on the cheek. It was real and tender and full of feeling. Clara kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. When they finally pulled apart, both a little breathless, Franklin rested his forehead against hers. I think I am falling in love with you, Clara Young. I think I am falling in love with you too, Franklin Young. The autumn brought cooler weather and a different set of tasks. Franklin and Clara worked together to prepare for winter, putting up the last of the garden vegetables, checking that all the buildings were sound, gathering firewood. Franklin went into town and returned with supplies that would last through the season, as snow could make the trip difficult or impossible. Clara had been feeling strange for a few weeks, tired and queasy in the mornings. She tried to dismiss it, thinking perhaps she had eaten something that disagreed with her. But when her monthly courses failed to arrive for the second time, she had to acknowledge what her body was telling her. She was with child. The realization filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. Joy because this was something she wanted, something Franklin wanted. Terror because it was one more way she could fail, one more thing that could go wrong. What if she could not carry the baby to term? What if something went wrong in the birth? What if she was a terrible mother? She waited to tell Franklin, wanting to be certain, wanting to find the right moment. But he noticed the changes in her, the way she could no longer stomach coffee in the morning, how she tired more easily. One evening as they sat by the fire, Franklin working on repairing a bridle while Clara mended a shirt, he set down his work and looked at her directly. Clara, are you unwell? Should we get the doctor from town? Clara set down her own work, her hands shaking slightly. I am not unwell. I am with child. The bridle fell from Franklin's hands, hitting the floor with a soft thud. He stared at her, his expression unreadable. A baby. Yes, I think I am about 2 months along, perhaps a bit more. Franklin was across the room in 3 long strides, pulling Clara to her feet and into his arms. A baby, he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. We are going to have a baby. Relief flooded through Clara at his reaction. She had known intellectually that he would be happy, but some part of her had still feared disappointment. You are pleased? Franklin pulled back to look at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. Pleased, Clara, I am overjoyed. You have given me more than I ever dreamed possible. A home, a family, a reason to build toward the future. His hand came to rest gently on her still flat stomach. A child, our child. I am frightened, Clara admitted. What if something goes wrong? What if I cannot do this? Then we will face it together, Franklin said firmly. You are not alone in this, Clara. I will be with you every step of the way. We will bring this baby into the world together, and we will raise them together, and whatever happens, we will handle it together. His certainty helped ease Clara's fears. She leaned into him, letting herself be held, letting herself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. Franklin became even more attentive after learning about the baby. He insisted Clara rest more, took on more of the heavy work, worried constantly that she was overexerting herself. At first, Clara found it touching. After a few weeks, she found it smothering. Franklin, I can still work, she said one morning when he tried to take a basket of laundry from her hands. I am with child, not dying. I know, but I want to make sure you are safe, that the baby is safe. The best way to keep us safe is to let me move around and be active. Sitting idle will only make me weak. Clara kept hold of the basket. I promise I will tell you if something is too much, but you have to trust me to know my own limits. Franklin looked troubled but finally nodded. All right, but you will tell me. The moment something feels wrong, I promise. As her belly began to swell with the growing child, Clara found herself settling more deeply into her role as Franklin's wife and partner. The ranch felt like home now, not a strange foreign place. She knew the rhythms of the seasons, the patterns of the work, the particular quirks of their animals and land. She had become part of the fabric of this place, woven into its daily life. Winter came with cold winds and occasional snow. On the worst days, when the wind howled and the temperature dropped, Franklin would not go further than the barn. He and Clara would spend long days inside together, talking, reading aloud from the few books they had, planning for the spring and for the baby who would arrive as summer returned. Clara found herself opening up to Franklin in ways she had never opened up to anyone. She told him about her parents, how much she missed them, how their death had cut her loose from everything safe and familiar. She told him about the years with her aunt, the constant feeling of being unwanted, the quiet desperation that had led her to answer his advertisement. Franklin held her as she spoke, his arms secure around her, and when she was done, he shared his own pain. The weight of responsibility he had felt when his parents died, left alone with a ranch and debts, and no clear path forward. The loneliness of the years that followed. The fear that he would live and die alone, that everything his parents had built would die with him. But then you came, Franklin said, his hand resting on Clara's swollen belly. And suddenly the future looked different, full of possibility instead of just obligation. I feel the same way, Clara said softly. I did not realize how small my life had become until I came here and it got so much bigger. The baby kicked under Franklin's hand, and his face lit up with wonder. Every time it happened, he reacted the same way, as if it was a miracle he could not quite believe. Clara loved that about him, his capacity for joy in simple things. It made her see the world differently, notice the beauty in the harsh landscape, the satisfaction in a day's work well done, the pleasure of a quiet evening by the fire. Sarah Henderson visited once during the winter, making the journey despite the cold because she said she needed to check on Clara. She looked at Clara's growing belly with approval and shared advice about childbirth and infant care. She was practical and straightforward, not minimizing the challenges but not dwelling on fears either. You will do fine, Sarah said as she prepared to leave. You are stronger than you think, Clara Young. This land has a way of bringing out what is in people, showing them what they are really made of. You have proven yourself already. The words stayed with Clara. Had she proven herself? She still had doubts, still worried that she was not enough, but perhaps that was all right. Perhaps doubts were just part of being human, and what mattered was pushing forward despite them. Spring arrived gradually, the cold retreating and the land beginning to green up where water touched it. Franklin was busy with calving season, exhausted but energized by the work. Clara was huge now, moving slowly, uncomfortable in the heat that was beginning to build. The baby was due any time, and Franklin had ridden into town to bring back Mrs. Garrett, who had experience with birthing babies, and had agreed to stay with them until the child arrived. Mrs. Garrett took over the household with cheerful efficiency, clucking over Clara like a mother hen, and regaling them with stories of all the births she had attended over the years. Her presence was both comforting and nerve-wracking, making the imminent arrival of the baby feel suddenly very real. The pain started on a warm May morning while Franklin was out checking on a fence line. Clara was folding laundry when the first contraction hit, stopping her breath and sending a wave of fear through her. Mrs. Garrett took one look at her face and sprang into action. "It is time, then. Come on, dear, let us get you to bed. You there, boy," she called to Timothy Henderson, who had ridden over to help Franklin with some work. "Go find Mr. Young and tell him to get back here now." The hours that followed were a blur of pain and effort. Mrs. Garrett was a steady presence, guiding Clara through the contractions, offering encouragement and practical advice. Franklin arrived, pale and scared, and Mrs. Garrett assigned him the task of holding Clara's hand and staying out of the way of the important work. Clara had never experienced pain like this. It consumed her, wave after wave, until she thought she could not possibly endure any more. But Mrs. Garrett kept telling her she could, that she was doing well, that the baby was coming. And Franklin was there, his hand in hers, his voice in her ear telling her how strong she was, how brave, how much he loved her. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set, Clara pushed one last time and felt the baby slip free. A moment of terrifying silence, and then a loud, angry cry filled the room. Mrs. Garrett laughed, her hands busy with the squalling infant. "You have a son," she announced, wrapping the baby in a clean cloth. "A healthy baby boy." She placed the baby on Clara's chest, and Clara looked down at the red, wrinkled face of her son. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a thatch of dark hair, and Franklin's eyes. Emotion overwhelmed her, love so fierce and immediate it took her breath away. Franklin leaned over them both, his eyes wet with tears he was not trying to hide. His hand came up to gently touch the baby's tiny head. "He is beautiful. You did so well, Clara. I am so proud of you." "We have a son," Clara whispered, still not quite believing it. "We have a son," Franklin repeated, his voice full of wonder. "They named him Thomas, after Franklin's father." Mrs. Garrett stayed for a few more days, teaching Clara how to nurse the baby, helping her navigate the exhausting early days of motherhood. Franklin was utterly besotted with his son, holding him at every opportunity, marveling at every tiny movement and sound. Clara, exhausted and overwhelmed, would watch Franklin with Thomas and feel her heart expand. This man, this good, kind, patient man, was her husband. This child was their son. This life was hers, not borrowed or held on sufferance, but truly hers. The first weeks with Thomas were hard. Clara was tired all the time, her body recovering from the birth while dealing with the constant demands of a newborn. There were moments when she felt completely inadequate, certain she was doing everything wrong. But Franklin was always there, supporting her, taking the baby when she needed to rest, reassuring her that she was doing a good job. "You are a wonderful mother," he told her one night when she was crying from exhaustion and frustration after Thomas would not stop fussing. "Look at him. He is healthy and growing. He is loved. That is all because of you. I feel like I do not know what I am doing." None of us know what we are doing at first. We learn as we go. Franklin rocked Thomas gently, the baby finally settling against his father's chest. But we learn together. We figure it out together, just like everything else. As Thomas grew from a newborn into an infant, Clara found her footing as a mother. She learned to read his different cries, to anticipate his needs, to function on less sleep than she had ever thought possible. She learned to work around him, carrying him in a sling while she did household tasks, nursing him while she sat on the porch watching Franklin work. Sarah Henderson became a frequent visitor, bringing her own experiences as a mother to help guide Clara. A friendship grew between the two women, forged in the shared challenges of ranching and motherhood. Sarah's son Timothy became a fixture around the ranch as well, helping Franklin with work and earning a bit of money while his father finished recovering from his injury. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more complicated than before, but richer too. Clara would look around at her life, at Franklin working in the distance, at Thomas sleeping in his cradle, at the house she kept and the meals she prepared, and feel a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. One evening, when Thomas was about 6 months old, Clara and Franklin sat on the porch watching the sun set while Thomas dozed in Clara's arms. The sky was painted in brilliant oranges and purples, the air cooling after the heat of the day. "You ever regret it?" Clara asked quietly. "Sending for a mail-order bride instead of finding someone here, someone you could meet properly first." Franklin turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Never. Not once. Clara, you are exactly who I needed, exactly who I wanted, even if I did not know it when I wrote that advertisement." He reached over and took her hand. "You came to me afraid that you were not enough, and every single day you have proven that you are more than I dreamed, more than I deserve." "You deserve everything good," Clara said fiercely. "You are the best man I have ever known." "Then we are well matched," Franklin said, bringing her hand to his lips, "because you are the best woman I have ever known." Thomas stirred in Clara's arms, making small sleeping sounds. She looked down at his peaceful face, then up at Franklin's tender expression, then out at the land that had become her home. The land that had seemed so harsh and unforgiving when she first arrived now seemed full of possibility. Hard, yes, but honest. Demanding, but rewarding. A place where she could be herself, where she could be enough, where she could belong. "I love you," Clara said, the words coming easily now where once they would have stuck in her throat. "I love this life we have built together." "I love you too," Franklin replied. "And I love the life we are going to continue building. For us, for Thomas, for any other children we might be blessed with." "Other children," Clara smiled. "Are you hoping for a house full?" "I would not complain," Franklin admitted with a grin, "but I am happy with what we have right now. You, Thomas, the ranch, a future to look forward to. That is more than enough." But it was not enough, not in a bad way, but in the way that life is never static. Things grew and changed. Thomas learned to crawl, then to walk, keeping Clara busy chasing after him as he explored everything he could reach. Franklin hired a hand to help with the ranch work, a young man named David who lived in the bunkhouse Franklin had renovated. The extra help meant Franklin could spend more time with his family, teaching Thomas about the animals, riding out with Clara when she wanted to escape the house for a few hours. Clara became more involved in the small community around Terlingua. She attended the occasional social gatherings in town, helped organize a fundraiser for a new schoolhouse, made friends with other ranch wives. She was no longer the frightened mail-order bride who had stepped off the stage wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. She was Clara Young, rancher's wife, mother, friend, a woman who belonged. When Thomas was 2, Clara became pregnant again. This time there was less fear, more confidence. She knew what to expect, knew her body could do this, knew Franklin would be there every step of the way. The pregnancy was easier than the first, or perhaps Clara was just more accustomed to the discomforts. Their daughter was born on a crisp October morning, coming quickly and with less drama than Thomas's arrival. Franklin held his daughter with the same wonder he had shown with Thomas, tears streaming down his face as he looked at her tiny features. "She looks like you," he told Clara. "She has your eyes, your mouth. She is beautiful." They named her Emma, and she proved to be a calmer baby than Thomas had been, content to observe the world with solemn eyes. Thomas was fascinated by his little sister, always wanting to help with her care, bringing her toys and patting her head gently. The ranch prospered. Franklin's hard work and careful management paid off in healthy cattle and good sales. He was able to buy more land, expand the herd, make improvements to the property. But he never lost sight of what mattered most. His family always came first, the work second. On their 5th anniversary, Franklin surprised Clara with a gift. He led her outside to the barn, where he had hidden a beautiful wooden rocking chair, polished and perfect. "I made it for you," he said, looking almost shy. "I know you are always rocking Emma to sleep, and I thought you should have a proper chair for it." Clara ran her hand over the smooth wood, taking in the careful craftsmanship, the love that had gone into every detail. "You made this. When?" "In the evenings after you went to bed." "I have been working on it for months." Franklin watched her anxiously. "Do you like it?" "I love it." Clara turned and wrapped her arms around him. "I love it and I love you, thank you." They stood there in the barn, holding each other, while outside the children played under David's watchful eye. 5 years. It felt like a lifetime and no time at all. Clara thought back to the frightened woman who had arrived in Terlingua, so certain she would not be enough. That woman seemed like a stranger now. Clara had been shaped by this life, by this land, by Franklin's unwavering love and support. She had become someone stronger, more capable, more confident. "What are you thinking about?" Franklin asked, pulling back to look at her face. "About how far we have come, how much has changed since I arrived." "You miss Boston. Your old life," Clara shook her head. "Not for a moment. This is my life now. You, the children, the ranch, this is everything I want. This is home." Franklin kissed her then, slow and sweet. "You are everything I want too, everything I need. You always have been." As the years continued to pass, the young family grew deeper roots in Texas soil. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved working alongside his father, learning everything Franklin could teach him about ranching. Emma was quieter, more thoughtful, preferring to help her mother in the house or sit on the porch with a book. They were so different, but both were loved with the same fierce devotion. Clara's friendship with Sarah Henderson deepened into something like sisterhood. They helped each other through hard times and celebrated good times together. When John Henderson died suddenly of a heart problem, Clara was there to support Sarah through her grief. When Emma broke her arm falling from the barn loft, Sarah was there with practical advice and steady hands. The community around Terlingua grew slowly but steadily. The schoolhouse was built, and Thomas started attending classes. A new church was constructed, and the young family attended services most Sundays. There were barn raisings and quilting bees and summer picnics, events that marked the passage of time and the building of a real community. Franklin's hair began to show gray at the temples, and lines appeared around his eyes from squinting into the sun. Clara found threads of silver in her own hair and noticed her hands becoming weathered despite her best efforts. They were aging, marked by time and hard work, but they were aging together. On a hot July day in 1892, a decade after Clara had arrived in Terlingua, she stood on the porch watching Franklin teach Thomas how to rope a calf. Emma sat beside her, reading aloud from a book of poetry. Clara's hand rested on her belly, where their third child grew. This pregnancy had been a surprise, coming when they had thought their family complete, but a welcome one nonetheless. Franklin caught her eye across the yard and smiled, that same smile that had made her heart skip when she first started falling in love with him. She smiled back, feeling the baby flutter inside her, listening to Emma's young voice stumbling over difficult words, watching Thomas finally succeed in roping the calf and pumping his fist in triumph. This life, this beautiful, hard, wonderful life, was hers. She had built it with Franklin, piece by piece, day by day, through challenges and triumphs and the mundane moments in between. She had been so afraid she would not be enough, but Franklin had proven to her every single day that she was more than enough, that she was everything. And in proving it to her, she had come to believe it herself. Not because she was perfect, but because perfection was not the point. The point was showing up, doing the work, loving with all you had, and building something real and lasting. Clara Patterson, who had become Clara Young, had found her home. Not just a place, but a life, a family, a purpose. She had found love that was patient and kind and steady. She had found her own strength, her own worth, her own belonging. The sun beat down on the Texas desert, harsh and unforgiving as always. But here, in this little corner of the vast landscape, surrounded by the people she loved and who loved her, Clara had everything she needed. She was home. The baby boy, when he arrived that October, was named James. He had Clara's dark hair and Franklin's blue-green eyes, and he completed their family in a way that felt exactly right. Thomas, now 10, was protective of his baby brother. Emma, at 8, loved to help care for him, singing him songs and telling him stories. Franklin, holding James for the first time, had looked at Clara with such love and gratitude that she felt it like a physical warmth. 3 children, he said softly. We have been blessed beyond measure. We have, Clara agreed, tired but happy. We truly have. Life with 3 children was chaotic and exhausting and full of joy. There were hard days when nothing seemed to go right, when the work was overwhelming, and the children were difficult, and Clara wondered how she would manage it all. But there were more good days than bad, days full of laughter and small triumphs and moments of simple contentment. The ranch continued to thrive under Franklin's management. He was known throughout the region as a fair dealer and a skilled rancher. Young men sought work with him because they knew he would treat them right and teach them well. The young ranch became a place of respect and prosperity. Clara, too, gained a reputation. She was known for her kindness, her practical wisdom, and her willingness to help neighbors in need. When a family lost their home to a fire, Clara organized the community to provide clothing, food, and shelter. When a young widow needed help learning to manage her late husband's property, Clara spent time teaching her the skills she would need. She had become a pillar of their small community, someone others turned to in times of trouble. Thomas grew into a young man who was the image of his father, tall and strong and steady. At 18, he was Franklin's right hand on the ranch, capable of managing things when his father was away. He had his eye on a girl in town, Mary Sullivan, and Franklin and Clara watched with amusement as their son navigated the awkward territory of courtship. Emma, at 16, was a beauty, though she seemed unaware of it. She had her mother's practical nature and her father's quiet strength. She wanted to be a teacher, and Clara and Franklin supported this dream, making sure she continued her education and connected with the schoolteacher who could mentor her. James, at 8, was the wild one, always getting into mischief, always pushing boundaries. He kept Clara on her toes and made Franklin laugh with his antics. He was the baby, and perhaps a bit spoiled because of it, but he was also loving and full of life. One spring evening, when the children were all occupied with their own activities, Franklin suggested he and Clara take a ride. They saddled up and rode out across the rangeland, following familiar paths under a sky painted with sunset colors. They rode in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from years of being together, of knowing each other so well that words are not always necessary. Franklin led them to a spot overlooking their property, where they could see the house and buildings in the distance, the cattle grazing peacefully, the land they had worked so hard to maintain and improve. He helped Clara down from her horse and they stood together, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. "You remember the first time I brought you out here?" Franklin asked. "You were so quiet and I was so nervous. I kept wondering what you were thinking, whether you were regretting your decision. I remember, I was terrified, The land seemed so big and empty, and I felt so small. And now, Clara looked out at the view, taking it all in. The land did not seem quite so big anymore, or perhaps she did not seem quite so small. Now I see home. I see the life we have built together. I see everything we have accomplished. Franklin turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. His hair was more gray than brown now, and his face was deeply lined, but his eyes were the same, warm and steady and full of love. Clara Young, you have given me the best years of my life. You took a lonely man with a ranch and turned it all into a home, a family, a legacy. You were afraid you would not be enough, but you have been everything, more than everything. You have been my partner, my love, my best friend. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible. Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. After all these years, he could still make her cry with his words, with the depth of feeling he expressed. You did the same for me. You saved me, Franklin. You gave me a place to belong, a purpose, a family. You loved me when I could not love myself, and you taught me that I was worthy of love. You were always worthy, Franklin said fiercely. Always. They kissed as the sun set behind them, casting long shadows across the land. They were not young anymore, but the love between them was as strong as ever, deeper even, forged by years of partnership and weathered by the storms they had faced together. The years continued their steady march. Thomas married Mary Sullivan in a beautiful ceremony at the church, and Clara cried happy tears as she watched her son pledge his life to the young woman he loved. Thomas and Mary built a house on the far side of the ranch property, planning to raise their own family on young land. Franklin gave Thomas a portion of the ranch to manage, proud to see his son carrying on the legacy. Emma went away to get teacher training in San Antonio, a decision that was both exciting and terrifying for Clara. Letting her daughter go out into the world was hard, but Clara was proud of Emma's determination and ambition. Emma wrote letters home regularly, full of her experiences and learning, and Clara treasured each one. James remained at home, still finding his way. At 16, he was caught between boyhood and manhood, sometimes responsible and capable, sometimes reckless and foolish. Franklin was patient with him, remembering his own young years, guiding James with a steady hand. Clara, now in her mid-40s, found herself entering a new phase of life. The hard physical work of her younger years had taken a toll, and some days her body ached in ways it never had before. But she adapted, finding new ways to contribute, taking on different tasks. She spent more time with the community, less time with the physical labor of the ranch. Franklin's health remained good, though he too was slowing down. He hired more hands to help with the work, relying more on Thomas to manage the day-to-day operations. He spent more time in the house, more time with Clara, and they both found they liked this new season of life. There was time to talk, to sit together, to simply enjoy each other's company without the constant press of urgent work. Thomas and Mary's first child, a daughter they named Clara after her grandmother, arrived on a snowy December morning. Holding her first grandchild, Clara felt the circle of life in a profound way. This tiny girl carried her name, her blood, her legacy forward into the future. "She is perfect," Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the baby. Franklin stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders, looking down at his granddaughter. "Just like her grandmother," he said softly, the grandchildren kept coming. Thomas and Mary had 3 children in quick succession. Emma came home from San Antonio with a young man named Robert, another teacher, and they married and settled in Terlingua. Emma and Robert had 2 children. James, after some wild years that gave Clara many sleepless nights, finally settled down with a rancher's daughter named Helen, and they started their own family. The young family grew and spread, all of them connected to the land Franklin and Clara had built their life on. The original adobe house was expanded and renovated over the years, growing to accommodate family gatherings where children and grandchildren filled every room with noise and life. Franklin and Clara became the patriarch and matriarch of a small dynasty. They were respected elders in the community, people who had weathered all the challenges Texas could throw at them and come through stronger. They were living proof that hard work, commitment, and love could build something lasting. On their 30th anniversary, the family threw a celebration. Children and grandchildren gathered along with friends and neighbors. There was food and music and dancing. People gave speeches honoring Franklin and Clara, talking about their impact on the community, their example of a strong marriage, their generosity and kindness. Clara, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love, stood with Franklin at the center of it all. She looked around at the faces, so many of them family, so many connected to her in ways both direct and indirect. This was the legacy they had built. Not just a successful ranch, but a family, a community, a web of relationships that would extend beyond their own lives. "What are you thinking?" Franklin asked, his arm around her waist. "I am thinking about the scared girl who stepped off that stagecoach 30 years ago," Clara said. "I wish I could tell her that everything would turn out better than she could possibly imagine." "She knew," Franklin said. "Deep down, she had the courage to take a chance to step into the unknown. That courage is what made all of this possible." "We made it possible," Clara corrected. "Together." "Together," Franklin agreed, pulling her close. "Always together." As they grew older, Franklin and Clara spent more time in quiet reflection. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over land they had worked for decades, and talk about their life together. They remembered the early days, the challenges they had faced, the ways they had grown and changed. They marveled at how different their life had turned out from what either of them had expected. Franklin's health began to decline when he was in his early 70s. Nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down of a body that had worked hard for many years. He moved more slowly, tired more easily. Clara adapted, taking on more of his care, repaying him for all the years he had taken care of her. "I am sorry," Franklin said one evening, frustrated by his own limitations. "I hate being a burden to you." Clara took his face in her weathered hands and looked him in the eye. "You are not a burden. You will never be a burden. Do you remember what you told me all those years ago? That we would face everything together. This is just one more thing we face together." "I love you," Franklin said, his eyes wet. "I have loved you since the day you stepped off that stage looking so frightened and trying so hard to be brave." "I have loved you since the day you told me I was more than enough," Clara replied. "You have spent every day of our marriage proving that to me. Now let me prove to you that you are more than enough, even now, even like this." They sat together in the fading light, hands clasped, bound by 35 years of marriage and a love that had only deepened with time. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else, together. Franklin lived to see 75, dying peacefully in his sleep on a cool March night. Clara woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still warm in hers. The grief was devastating, a physical pain that left her breathless. He had been her partner for more than 3 decades, the center of her world, the love of her life. How was she supposed to go on without him? But she did go on because she had to, because they had built too much for her to give up now. Because Franklin would have wanted her to keep living, to keep loving, to keep being the strong woman he had always seen in her. The family gathered for the funeral, all of them grieving the loss of the man who had been father, grandfather, great-grandfather friend. They laid him to rest in the small cemetery outside of Terlingua, under the vast Texas sky he had loved. Clara stood at his grave, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and felt both the weight of her loss and the strength of the family they had created together. In the months after Franklin's death, Clara struggled to find her footing. Everything reminded her of him. The house they had shared, the land they had worked, the memories embedded in every corner of the ranch. But slowly, with the support of her family, she began to heal. Not to forget, never to forget, but to carry the grief alongside the joy of having had such a love. She lived 5 more years after Franklin's death. Years spent surrounded by family, watching great-grandchildren grow, passing on the stories of the early days to anyone who would listen. She told them about Franklin's kindness, his strength, his unwavering love. She told them about being a frightened mail-order bride who had found more than she ever dreamed possible. She told them that love, real love, was built day by day through actions and choices and commitment. Clara died on a warm spring morning, sitting in the rocking chair Franklin had made for her all those years ago. She simply closed her eyes and did not open them again, passing peacefully from this world into whatever lay beyond. They buried her next to Franklin, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names and the years of their lives. But their real legacy was not in stone. It was in the thriving ranch that bore their name, in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood and their values forward. It was in the community they had helped build, in the lives they had touched, in the example they had set of what a marriage and a life could be when built on love and respect and partnership. The story of Franklin and Clara Young became part of the lore of Terlingua, told and retold, embellished and remembered. The scared mail-order bride and the lonely rancher who had taken a chance on each other and built something beautiful. The woman who had been afraid she was not enough, and the man who had proven to her every day that she was more than enough, more than he ever dreamed. Their story was proof that love could bloom in the harshest conditions, that commitment and faith could build something lasting, that 2 people willing to work together could create a legacy that would outlive them both. It was a story of the Old West, of hard work and harsh conditions and the strength required to survive. But more than that, it was a love story, pure and simple. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the land or the cattle or the prosperity, not the big moments or dramatic events, but the small, daily acts of love. The choice to show up, to work together, to support each other through good times and bad. The decision to believe in each other, to see the best in each other, to build a life together one day at a time. Franklin and Clara Young had done that, and in doing so, they had created something that would never truly die. Their love story would live on in the family they had created, in the land they had worked, in the community they had helped build. It would live on as an example of what was possible when 2 people truly committed to each other and to building a life together. The adobe house still stands, expanded and renovated over the generations, but still fundamentally the same structure Franklin's parents built and that he and Clara made into a home. Young descendants still work the land, still raise cattle under the harsh Texas sun. The rocking chair Franklin made sits in a place of honor, passed down through the family as a treasured heirloom. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets over the desert in brilliant colors, when the wind whispers through the mesquite, and the land settles into its ancient rhythms, you can almost feel them there. Franklin and Clara, together as they always were, watching over the legacy they built with love and hard work and unwavering faith in each other. Their story reminds us that we are all more than we think we are, that we all have strengths we have not yet discovered. It reminds us that love is not just a feeling but a choice, made new each day. It reminds us that partnership and commitment can weather any storm, overcome any obstacle, build any dream. Clara Patterson stepped off that stagecoach in 1882, afraid that she was not enough. Franklin Young spent every day for the rest of his life proving that she was more than he dreamed. And in the end, they proved that together, they could build something that would last forever. A love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the wild and beautiful Texas frontier.